Hey everyone, so 3.14 is finally in Wave 1 PTU, and this is a pretty exciting one since we finally get to explore the last landing zone in Stanton, the floating city of Orison. Along with that though, we're also getting some significant changes to how ship-to-ship combat is going to work, and a ton of other small things. I'm going to try to get through pretty much everything that stuck out to me, but you can also check out the patch notes linked down below if you want the somewhat complete list of all the changes. Before we start though, if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and or subscribing, and if you really want to help me out, you can do so by hitting that join button to become a channel member. I really appreciate it. Starting with what is probably the most anticipated inclusion in this patch, Orison is here, and it's beautiful. I already thought New Babbage was amazing, and they'd have a hard time making another landing zone on the same level as it, but Orison is at least as good in my opinion. Now there's not a ton of things here at the moment because half the city is coming along with the next patch, but there's still a decent amount of stuff here to explore as you walk around admiring the clouds of Crusader. But yeah, I did want to do a tour of the place for those of you who want to see it, but I also know a lot of you will enjoy exploring it for the first time yourself, and this video is going to be long enough anyway, so if you want to check out that tour you can go ahead and click the card or the link down below to see that whole walkthrough. It's a pretty cool place though, and it's definitely worth checking out, but just be warned it takes a while to get out of atmosphere and to be able to quantum travel somewhere else if you need to leave. I think you have to get up to something like 150,000 to 160,000 kilometers, and the city is located all the way down at 80,000 kilometers, so be prepared to be staring at the clouds for a while. Speaking of those clouds though, along with Orison we have a completely different version of Crusader thanks to these new volumetric clouds. These are a first iteration, so there are a few bugs that they know about, most obvious being the little dots that are all throughout them, and they are a massive performance hog at the moment. Like, just look at this massive stutter here when I quantum travel away while looking at them, but especially when you're walking or flying around Orison during a sunrise or sunset, they look pretty amazing. Now they've said that these new volumetric clouds are going to be coming to other planets moving forward, and I'm assuming they'll look a little different for each planet to fit in with everything there, and I think that's going to be pretty great, assuming that they can get the performance under control. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, but for now on Crusader, these really do add another layer of fidelity to the game, and I'm really impressed with them. Before we get into some of the gameplay changes, one change that's a bit more on the visual side is the new HUD UI. I think they're calling these canvas sliced HUDs, and for now all of the HUDs in this implementation are pretty much the same across all of the ships, but in the future I think the point of adding these and changing to this new style is that this is going to allow them to have each manufacturer use a slightly different style for their HUD. So that'll be cool to allow each manufacturer to have a distinct feel for their ship, but for what I think of this version, I think it's okay, and once I get used to where to look for everything, I think I'll like it, but there's a few things I'd like to see changed. So first of all, the 3D radar on most ships and these PTU patches seems to be blurry for whatever reason, so I want to see that fixed. But then there's like a mini version of the radar in the bottom left corner of the HUD, which I just find distracting. I don't see why you'd ever use that instead of using the full-size radar. And with the new scanning gameplay that I'll talk about in a bit, these little dots on the miniature radar are really hard for me to distinguish from the blobs that you get when something unknown is being detected. So I'd really just like to see this removed and replaced with something a bit more useful and less distracting. Other than that though, I do think it'll be cool for each manufacturer to have a slightly different looking HUD in the future, and this should hopefully allow for that. One last location update I wanted to mention is the new hospitals that have been added in preparation for 3.15 and the medical gameplay that it'll be bringing. So there is one located in Orison, but they've also gone ahead and opened up the other one in New Babbage as well. And over there they actually moved things around at the hab because the entrance used to be off to the left on your way out of the hab, but I think they want these hospitals to be pretty prominent, so that entrance is now located front and center right between the stairs down to the metro. Now, just like cargo decks and other things like that, these don't really have all that much gameplay associated with them at the moment, but you can go there to stock up on med pins and oxy pins if you want to. In the future though, these hospitals, along with ones on orbital stations and at the other landing zones, will be where you respawn if you get severely injured or die, and it also looks like you'll be able to buy medical insurance at some of the kiosks here too, but I'm not exactly sure when that's planned to be implemented. Beyond that though, there are a few new push and pullable objects in these hospitals, like these gurneys, the medical carts with various medical devices on them, and there's even a walker. It's pretty fun to mess around with these, but unfortunately at the moment you can't drag them up the stairs, so I didn't get too far into Orison in my efforts to steal one of them. But in the future these probably will actually have a purpose as well, and I look forward to hopefully getting some fun missions where you can bring a patient along on a stretcher and try to rush them to a hospital in time to get them the help they need. This patch also brings along a very long-awaited ship, the Constellation Taurus. I might do a more in-depth look at it in the future if they let us actually do any sort of cargo running, but for now you can get a pretty good idea of what the ship is just by comparing its slight differences to the other constellations. It still keeps those gimbaled quad-size 4s, which make the constellations great for PvE, and you have bunk space for 4, a turret that's not great, but is serviceable I guess, and then a surprise feature of the bottom turret being replaced with a tractor beam that will eventually be useful for loading cargo, so you can get some multi-crew gameplay in with this ship if you want to. As for hauling, it has a pretty roomy hold with 174 SU. This is significantly more than the Freelancer Max, which is good because it also is a lot less compact than that ship, and you also get this section at the back, which I assume is the shielded cargo hold, and that could be useful in the future. So yeah, at the moment, with no changes to cargo running and this ship's similarity to other ships in the lineup, there's not a ton to say about it, but I do like the stock gunmetal and yellow look, and I think with the recent love the constellations have been getting, it's going to be a pretty good option going forward. You get combat, cargo hauling, vehicle transport, and a bit of multi-crew functionality in a ship that's a pretty convenient size. What do you guys think about it though? Were you hoping for a slightly more unique ship after waiting all this time for it? Because this pretty much is just an Andromeda that's missing a turret in the snub and is slightly longer with a slightly bigger cargo bay? Or are you satisfied because it does have quite a bit of cargo capability and that was all you were after in the first place? Moving on to one of the biggest things in this patch besides Orison, we have the new capacitor system. And I think calling it the capacitor system is a little bit misleading because, like John Crew said, it is quite a comprehensive change to all ship behavior pretty much. This includes flight performance, and if you want to dig into how that's changed for each ship, the folks over at SC Leaks have put together an excellent spreadsheet that shows you the performance of a ship in 3.13 versus 3.14, and I've got that linked below if you're interested in seeing how a specific ship has been changed. But yeah, for some ships the flight performance is very different in 3.14. Now it will be cool to dig into this more as the patch comes out to see how these big balance changes affect everything, and as they get things figured out to where they want it to be, but for now, we at least have a pretty good idea of how the new power management system itself works and how you interact with it. So the whole purpose of this new system is to allow for players to make decisions during combat that have much more of an effect on their ship's performance than the old system would allow. With the old system, you basically just overclocked and overpowered everything that responded well to it, angled your shields if you wanted to, and that was it. And all of that could be done before combat. Besides flying and shooting, there really wasn't much of a reason to adjust anything during combat, so at times it would feel like there really wasn't all that much to do. With this new system, it's a much more dynamic balancing act where you have to decide if you want your power going to your shields, thrusters, or weapons if you're using energy weapons. This also comes along with changes to weapons, which I'll go over in a bit, but if you've played any of the older X-Wing games or the new Star Wars Squadrons, it's a pretty similar idea. I'm not knocking them for this though, because I think this system is simple enough to be used in a single-seat fighter by a single pilot during combat, which was the point, but since it uses the power triangle, it still fits in with the more complex system that Star Citizen has with all the MFDs, so if they wanted to in the future, they could make power balancing a bit more complicated for the larger ships, and have it be a task that needed to be done by a separate crew member if they really wanted to. But yeah, this adds even more key bindings if you don't want to look down at your MFDs and use the power triangle. But yeah, by default, you use F5 to increase power going to weapons, F6 to increase power going to thrusters, and F7 to increase power going to your shields, and F8 resets everything to the balance setting. And for whatever reason, these are different than what they have listed in the key bindings and the settings, so that was a little confusing at the beginning. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of these key bindings because they're a bit hard to reach during combat. You kind of have to take your hand off of one thing or the other, so it might be time for me to start making some modifier layers to help with stuff like this. So I definitely am a fan of having more options to control your ship during combat, since it makes the fighting feel a lot more engaging, but this first implementation does have a few things that I'm not a massive fan of. So for all three of the subsystems you control power on, there's a bit of a delay before things start recharging, and if you use any of the charge for whatever subsystem you're recharging, it'll stop, and if you want it to start charging again, you have to wait for that delay again. So an example of how this works for energy weapons is you have a certain capacity for stored shots, and if that capacity isn't full and you aren't currently shooting, your ship will start trying to replenish shots, and after that short startup delay, it'll begin adding more shots to that stored total. The speed at which this happens depends on how you have your power balanced, but there's always that startup delay, even when you have it maxed out, and this applies to shields and boost as well. And honestly, I don't really like it being this way, especially for energy weapons. First of all, it just feels clunky to have to watch and make sure that your weapons are fully recharged even when you have all of your power diverted to them, so you're just kind of watching that meter to make sure it's entirely filled up before you start shooting again. Also, in this supposed capacitor system, the energy for your shots are already stored by the time that you go to shoot them, I think is the intention, so I don't see why releasing that energy would conflict with charging up more shots. And then lastly, we'll get to ballistics in a second, but I just think that adding another inconvenience and downside to energy weapons is not needed when ballistics already have so many advantages. Let me know what you guys think about this new power management system though. I like it for the most part, and definitely like the idea of having a simplified but effective way of managing ship systems during combat that actually has a noticeable effect on how your ship performs, but some of these things, like those regen delays, just feel a little annoying to deal with at the moment. Okay, so for the ship capacitors, I was mostly positive on the changes that have been made, but as for the rest of the balance in the game, it's quite a mess with this patch. For whatever reason, in addition to making this big change to ship power management, they decided to change pretty much everything else related to ship combat performance as well, at the same time. Starting with weapons, like I mentioned earlier, energy weapons now behave quite differently. Whereas before, as long as your ship's power unit was adequate, you could shoot until the weapon's overheated. Now you have that limited pool of shots available. These are energy weapons, so you don't have to reload or restock your ammo or anything, but you do have to wait a bit for the bolts to regenerate. You can divert your power to speed up this process, and also when you have 100% of your power diverted to weapons, you get slightly more capacity for storing shots. Also, even with the stock power distribution, energy weapons in 3.14 shoot a lot faster than before, so that in combination with some of the other changes means time to kill is quite low in this patch. Energy weapons aren't the only type to receive changes though. As part of the earlier leaked patch notes, they mentioned that they significantly increased ammo counts on ship ballistic weapons, and well, it seems like they've already flip-flopped on that, because when I was testing out this Avenger here, I ran out of ammo way faster than I can remember ever running out in the past. At least you can easily see your ammo counts over on the right with this new HUD, which is nice, but other than that, I wish they had gone through with giving ballistics more ammo actually. If choosing ballistic weapons means you only have a few minutes worth of fire, which is what they're doing with this limited ammo capacity, then they're gonna have to be significantly better than energy weapons during that time to be worth using, and that's always gonna be a pain to balance, I think, and to make a fun experience out of. I just don't see how it's going to work out to have ships that only have enough ammo capacity for the duration of one fight, but are much better than other ships during that duration. You're either going to have to be constantly running around to restock and leaving the fight, or be at a massive disadvantage by running energy weapons. It's already causing problems in the PTU, especially with the new capacitors, because these add another benefit to using ballistics, which is you don't have to worry about your energy going to your weapons, because at the moment this has no effect on ballistic weapons. So that means you can give more energy to your thrusters and shields, which further increases the advantage that ballistics have over energy with other stuff like shield penetration. So yeah, as with a lot of this stuff, I expect a ton of changes coming as they try to get things back into a more reasonable state, but at the moment, ship weapons are a little bit interesting in terms of balance. If you thought that was enough changes though, CIG would not agree with you. We already talked about them changing how every ship in the game flies, but they've also made some pretty drastic changes to shields. First of all, a lot of ships have either gained or lost shield hardpoints. The 600i and Caterpillar, both of which I thought were already pretty well shielded, now both have double the shields with 2 size 3s each, and then other ships like the Sabre have lost shields. But that's pretty minor compared to the HP changes. In this first iteration, pretty much all of the sizes of shields have a lot less health than before, but the decrease isn't uniform across all of the sizes. I think size 2 shields have been hit the worst, at least from what it feels like, and for ships that didn't have their hardpoints changed, like the Cutlass, they feel ridiculously under-shielded, especially if you're going up against light or medium fighters. So yeah, things are a bit of a mess right now. I trust CIG will eventually get things balanced out, but I think they should have worked on making smaller changes instead of dumping everything in at once, because now it's going to be a very difficult task to see why one ship is underperforming versus another, with so many things being different than before. And oh yeah, a ton of the stock loadouts have been changed, like the Freelancer Miss, which I used to love for its stock quad Gatling setup, but it's now outfitted with laser cannons. So yeah, if you boot up into 3.14 and head into combat, be prepared for a very different experience. One combat-related thing that I am mostly happy about is the new missile operator mode. One potential downside to this mode is that you now can't lock missiles when you're firing your main weapons, but with the new weapon changes and missile minimum ranges, you're generally going to use your missiles when you're farther out and switch to weapons when you're closer in, so it's not that big of a deal most of the time. Okay, so to switch to this mode, you hit middle mouse button, the old bind for locking a missile, and then you should automatically start locking a missile if you have a ship targeted. One nice feature is that you can actually choose which missiles you want to use by cycling through with right click, which was not possible before. But yeah, you want to wait for the circle around your target to turn green before you launch your missile with left click to get the best possible lock, but you can actually launch missiles whenever now. If you don't have a lock, they'll just kind of dumbfire forwards, although it is a little bit laggy at the moment. I really like this change though, because it's just another thing that gives you more control over your ship and its systems. I could see small ships using this new dumbfire thing when engaging larger targets like Idris's when we hopefully get more events featuring those, and that'll be cool because it'll allow you to skillfully deploy missiles close enough to where they're going to be really hard for the enemy to shoot them down, and also you don't have to wait for that lock timer. It also could allow for bombing structures in the future, and with the A2 Hercules coming soon, this seems pretty promising. What do you guys think about this though? I initially was worried that this mode was just going to be an annoyance designed to force you to have someone in a co-pilot seat and force useless multi-crew tasks upon us, but I actually kind of like how it's turned out. Another big ship-related change is the new scanning system. So I mostly use this in the context of combat missions, and I haven't tried it out much for mining yet, so keep that in mind, but I think I like it so far. So instead of using tab to enter scanning mode, tab actually just automatically sends out a ping, and you can control the angle of that ping by using the comma and period button instead of scrolling like you used to. These pings serve the same purpose as the old version, but now when you pick up a signature, instead of getting the confusing cubes that took up a ton of space on screen, you get more of a blob of indicators to tell you what general area a signature is in. Once you get that, you can hit V to enter scanning mode and hold left click and use scroll to adjust the angle of that, but this should allow you to scan those areas that your ping brought up, and if the signature of the ship or whatever you're looking at is high enough, it'll pop up along with a ton of information. So in addition to the stuff that you used to get, like crime stat rating and life signs on board, you can actually see the ship's loadout now, which could definitely be useful in a combat situation. Additionally, you get this enlarged preview of the ship, so you can kind of see what it's doing and where it's pointing, even when you're beyond visual range. So yeah, I like this change because now it feels like you actually have a reason to scan things that isn't just purely for fun or for mining, and it can give you some pretty useful information in some situations. You can actually even scan some of the stations and it'll give you a little flavor text about them too, so that's kind of cool. And it's just another example of them adding even more depth to the verse. Moving on, another small change is you're now able to surrender yourself to law enforcement when you have a crime stat, instead of having to just sit and let them kill you like you did before if you wanted to turn yourself in. The way that this works is pretty simple. So when you're being chased by security forces, one of them should contact you over comms and tell you that you can surrender by powering down your ship and staying still. And as long as you do that in time before they blow you up, you should be able to turn yourself in without dying. This doesn't really matter at the moment, but once medical gameplay is in, it could potentially save you from some negative side effects of dying. So yeah, after you power down your ship and surrender, you'll just be transported to Clutcher via a black screen like it would be when you died in the past. And so yeah, while this isn't all that big of a change at the moment, in the future as we get more Death of a Spaceman mechanics, you'll want to avoid dying as much as possible, so it'll be nice to have the option to avoid some of the consequences of an extra death that would otherwise be tacked on to your prison sentence. Alright, so that's about all I have for this video. Overall, there's a ton of things to mess around with in 3.14, which is nice for a change because the past few patches have felt a little bit light. The balance issues are a little bit rough at the moment, but I'm sure those will get worked out, and I actually forgot to mention that while performance in Orison is definitely rough, it did seem to be improved pretty much everywhere else for me. This could just be a PTU thing, but I'm hopeful because it was like that across pretty much every server that I was on. Let me know what you all think of the changes though, and how your experience has been if you've been checking out the PTU though. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to help me out, you can do so by hitting that like or subscribe button, or hitting that join button to become a member. So thank you to my members, GreatWatch93 and Starlit Domina, and thanks for watching.